I ran my hands over the smooth silk of my father's gift one more time before stepping out of the tiny beat-up trailer that was supposed to be my room for the Whitmore family's summer trip to the Hamptons. The bright emerald green dress, what my adoptive sisters thought was just some lucky find from a thrift shop, caught the light from the setting sun as I walked toward the fancy ballroom at the exclusive Hamptons Country Club. Behind me, that rusty, beat-up trailer sat on the perfect grass like an ugly scar, put there on purpose by my family to remind me that I didn't belong. Tonight, at the big summer solstice ball, everything was about to change forever. Well, look who decided to show up. How's the trailer? You must feel so at home back there behind the dumpsters, Charlotte said in that nasty voice of hers as I got close to the club's shiny marble entrance. Well, look who decided to show up. How's the trailer? Charlotte said in that nasty voice of hers as I got close to the club's shiny marble entrance. You must feel so at home back there behind the dumpsters. My adoptive sister's expensive dress, a $15,000 creation she bought just for tonight, made swooshing sounds as she turned around to show off how much better she was than me. I see you're wearing that old ugly thing again. Didn't we tell you this was supposed to be a fancy event? Behind her, Victoria and Sophia, my other two adoptive sisters, looked at each other with those knowing smiles they always shared. Victoria's designer suit cost more than most people make in 3 months from her trust fund money, while Sophia's custom dress had been flown in special from Italy. All 3 girls had grown up in the huge Whitmore house in New York City, going to the most expensive private schools and spending every summer in the Hamptons since they were little kids. Old money families with even older attitudes about who mattered and who didn't. The dress is just fine, I said quietly, touching the tiny beads that had been sewn on by hand. Italian workers had spent months making those beads perfect back in 1995. If only these girls knew they were looking at a one-of-a-kind piece from one of the most famous designers in the world, made special for someone who never got to wear it. Mother, Patricia Whitmore, came out of the country club's ladies' room, her face frozen in that look of mild disappointment that never seemed to change. Too much plastic surgery had made it hard for her to show real emotions anyway. Celeste, honey, you know how important tonight is for our family's reputation. The richest families in America will be here tonight. The old Dutch families, the railroad money, the oil fortunes. Maybe you could have tried a little harder to look the part. The funny thing was that the Whitmores thought they were so important. Sure, they'd made their money back in the 1800s with ships and railroads, but compared to some of the people here tonight, they were practically newcomers to wealth. Their $50 million house was nice, but in the Hamptons, that barely got you noticed by the really rich families. She looks fine for someone we're helping out, Charlotte's husband Bradford said under his breath, fixing his $20,000 watch, a wedding present paid for by his own family's money. After all, we can't all be born into the right families. I looked at my own watch, an old Cartier that my birth father had left with the dress, supposedly found at an estate sale according to the story my family liked to tell. 8:47 at night. The cocktail party was already going strong inside, and somewhere in that ballroom, a conversation that should have happened 30 years ago was about to finally take place. Really, Celeste, Victoria added, you look like trash. You should just be thankful we even brought you along. Most families wouldn't be so kind to their charity cases. The charity case story had been what they told everyone since they adopted me from foster care when I was 8 years old. Poor mixed-race girl, saved from the terrible foster care system by the good-hearted Whitmores, given chances she never could have earned on her own. They'd made sure I understood how much I owed them every single day for the past 22 years. Speaking of places to stay, Sophia laughed in that mean way of hers. How was your night in that trailer? We really tried to get you a room here at the club, but they were all booked up. Such bad luck. The 3 sisters had reserved the most expensive suites for themselves at $3,000 per night each, while sticking me in the old groundskeeper's rusty trailer. It was fine, I said back, not mentioning that I'd spent most of the night looking at old photos I'd found hidden in my jewelry box, pictures of a woman who looked just like me, wearing the exact same dress I had on right now, along with letters from my birth father that I'd first read when I turned 21, explaining who my mother really was and why this dress was so important. Well, let's just get this over with, Patricia said with a big sigh, linking arms with her biological daughters. Remember, Celeste, tonight is about our family making the right connections with the right people. Try not to embarrass us. The ballroom at the exclusive Hamptons Country Club sparkled like something from a fairy tale. Huge crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing little rainbows across walls covered with paintings of the families who'd founded this place. A small group of musicians played classical music near the big glass doors that opened up to the perfectly kept gardens outside. The list of people here tonight read like the richest families in America, people whose names were on hospital buildings and whole wings of universities. I stayed back and watched as my family made their big entrance. I could see Charlotte giving fake air kisses to Mrs. Pemberton while Victoria started talking excitedly with the youngest member of the Vanderbilt family. They moved through the crowd like they'd been doing this their whole lives, every gesture showing that they belonged here, in this world of extreme wealth. Celeste! I heard someone call my name from across the big room. James Morrison Webb, a guy I'd known from Harvard who'd always been nice to me despite my family's obvious embarrassment about me, walked over with his usual warm smile. You look absolutely incredible tonight. That dress is amazing. It looks like it belongs in a museum. Thank you, I said, watching my sisters glance over with those looks of polite worry they always got. They'd never understood why someone from James's level of society would want to be friends with their project. No, I'm serious, James went on, looking closely at the detailed beadwork on my dress. This is incredible work. Where in the world did you find something like this? Before I could answer, Charlotte appeared next to us like magic. Oh, that old thing? Celeste has quite the eye for finding vintage pieces at thrift stores. She found it at some little secondhand shop in the city. Her laugh sounded like glass breaking. We keep telling her she should open her own used clothing store. She's so good at finding treasures in other people's old stuff. Really interesting, James said quietly, but I could see him looking at the dress even more carefully. As someone who collected vintage fashion for his mother's museum foundation, he clearly knew quality when he saw it. The evening went on with its usual rhythm. I watched my family work the room, each sister playing their own angle. Charlotte was flirting with a tech billionaire's son. Victoria was posing for photos with an oil fortune heir, and Sophia was positioning herself near the pharmaceutical money families. Patricia held court with the older women, talking about charity events and museum boards like she was one of them. I found a quiet corner near the dance floor, holding a glass of champagne and watching the elegant waltz that had just begun. Couples glided across the polished marble in perfect rhythm, their expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos creating a scene from another era. High above on the club's indoor balcony, I could see a lone figure seated in what everyone knew was the reserved chair. Harrison Ashford IV, Harry to those brave enough to use his first name, sat in his usual spot overlooking the ballroom. For 20 years, he'd watched every ball from that same perch, never once coming down to join the festivities. People said he preferred observing to participating, that he'd lost his taste for socializing after some family tragedy long ago. As I moved slightly to get a better view of the dancers, the emerald silk of my dress caught the light from the massive chandeliers above. The beadwork sparkled like tiny stars, just for a moment, but long enough. On the balcony, Harry suddenly sat forward in his chair. His weathered hands gripped the brass railing as he leaned over, squinting through the crowd. Something about the flash of green silk, the way it moved, the unmistakable cut of that particular dress had stopped him cold. "Richard," he called to his assistant, his voice urgent but quiet. "Richard, come here immediately." The assistant, a well-dressed man in his 50s who'd been with the Ashford family for decades, hurried over. "Yes, Mr. Ashford." "That girl," Harry said, pointing with a shaking finger toward me. "The one in the green dress by the dance floor. Find out who she is. Now." Richard pulled out his phone and began making discreet inquiries. Within moments, he was back at Harry's side, reading from his screen. Celeste Whitmore, sir. Adopted daughter of the Whitmore family. She's 30 years old, came to them from foster care when she was 8. That's all the information I could gather quickly. The color drained from Harry's face. His hands trembled as he gripped the railing tighter. Foster care, he whispered. 30 years old. And that dress. His voice broke. My God, Richard, I think that's Elena's dress. Without another word, Harry stood up from his chair with a determination that surprised even his long-time assistant. For the first time in 20 years, Harrison Ashford IV was coming down to the ballroom floor. The massive ballroom fell into a hush as Harry appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Dancers paused in their steps. Every eye in the room turned upward to watch the legendary recluse begin his descent. Is that really Harry Ashford? Someone whispered. He never comes down, another voice said in amazement. Something must be terribly wrong, a third person murmured. Step by step, Harry made his way down the marble staircase, his hand gripping the banister for support. His legs felt unsteady, not from age, but from the overwhelming possibility that had just occurred to him. As he crossed the ballroom floor, Patricia Whitmore spotted him immediately. She practically threw herself in his path, her face lighting up with social opportunity. Mr. Ashford, she gushed, spreading her arms wide. What an unexpected pleasure. We're so honored. But Harry walked past her as if she were invisible, his eyes locked on me across the room. Charlotte tried next, stepping directly in front of him with her most dazzling smile. Mr. Ashford, I'm Charlotte Whitmore Bradford. We've met before at the... Harry sidestepped her without acknowledgement, his pace never slowing. Victoria and Sophia both attempted to intercept him, each trying to introduce themselves, to claim some connection, to bask in the attention of having the Harry Ashford notice them. But his laser focus never wavered. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as he approached me, and I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching this unprecedented moment. When he finally stopped in front of me, we stood there in complete silence for what felt like forever. This close, I could see everything. The kind blue eyes that looked so much like my own, the strong jawline that I recognized from my mirror, the way he held his head when he was thinking deeply. And he was studying me with the same intensity, taking in every detail of my face, my posture, and most importantly, my dress. That dress you're wearing, he said very quietly. Can I ask where you got it? My heart started beating fast. It was my mother's, I said before I could stop myself. The truth came out before I could tell the lie I'd practiced so many times. My birth father left me a box before he couldn't take care of me anymore. He told me not to open it until I turned 21. This dress was inside, along with letters explaining who my mother really was. Harry's face went completely white. His hand grabbed the back of a nearby chair, and for a second I thought he might fall down. Your mother's, he whispered. What was your mother's name, child? Elena, I said, watching his face carefully. Elena Ashford. She died when I was born. My father, Roberto Rodriguez, couldn't raise me alone after she died, so I went into foster care. The crystal champagne glass slipped from Harry's fingers and crashed against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, and several people nearby stopped talking and turned to look. Elena, he said, barely able to speak. My Elena, my daughter. The whole world seemed to spin around me. Your daughter? The dress, Harry said, reaching out with shaking fingers to touch the green silk. I ordered this specially from Valentino back in 1995. It was supposed to be a graduation gift for my daughter Elena when she finished college at Columbia. But she... His voice broke completely. She left before I could give it to her. Left because I was a stupid, prejudiced old man who couldn't see past the color of the man she loved. My adoptive family was still across the room, completely unaware that their carefully built world was about to fall apart. Through the crowd, I could see Charlotte laughing with the tech heir, Victoria taking selfies, Sophia networking with pharmaceutical heiresses. She must have come back for it, Harry continued, his eyes filling up with tears. Elena must have taken the dress when she left, kept it with her through everything, before she went into labor. Before she died having me, I finished softly. Roberto kept it for me in a sealed box. He said she wanted me to have it, wanted me to know where I came from, but that I shouldn't open it until I was old enough to understand. I was 21 when I finally learned the truth. Harry's legs seemed to give out completely. He fell into a nearby chair, staring at me like I was a ghost. "You're my granddaughter, my Elena's daughter. I've been looking for you for 30 years. "That can't be possible," I whispered. But even as I said it, I could see the similarities. The shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, the way he held his head when he was thinking. "The foster care system," Harry said urgently. "When Roberto got sick, you disappeared into the system. I hired private investigators for decades, but the records were sealed, the trail went cold. You just vanished." Across the room, Patricia Whitmore noticed our intense conversation and started walking toward us, her face set in those lines of practiced social concern. "Mr. Ashford," she called out sweetly, "I see you've met our Celeste. We're so proud of how well she's adjusted since we adopted her from foster care." "Mrs. Whitmore," Harry said, standing up to his full height. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from being used to giving orders. "We need to talk. Right now." Patricia's smile started to fade as she took in Harry's expression and the broken glass at our feet. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "That depends," Harry said, his eyes never leaving mine. "On what you've told this young woman about where she really comes from." "Where she comes from?" Patricia laughed nervously. "Well, Celeste came to us from foster care when she was 8. A wonderful success story, really. We've given her every opportunity." "Every opportunity?" Harry's voice got louder, making people all over the ballroom turn to look. "You've had her living in a trailer on property my family owns while your real daughters stay in the most expensive suites. You've told her she's a charity case when she's the heir to one of America's oldest fortunes." All the conversations around us stopped completely. Victoria, Charlotte, and Sophia turned away from their own conversations, faces showing confusion and growing alarm. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, walking over with her practiced social smile, "but I think there's been some kind of mistake." "The only mistake," Harry said firmly, "is how my granddaughter ended up with a family that treats her like a servant while living off interest from trust funds that will never equal what she's supposed to inherit." "Granddaughter?" Victoria's voice cracked when she said the word. Harry turned to speak to the growing crowd around us. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Celeste Rodriguez Ashford, my daughter Elena's child and the only heir to the entire Ashford estate." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. I could see the math happening in my adoptive family's eyes. The Ashford fortune was estimated at $3.5 billion, making it one of the largest private estates in America. "That's crazy," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "Celeste came from foster care. She can't be." "DNA doesn't lie," Harry said simply. "Though I think a simple test will only confirm what I can see with my own eyes. She has Elena's smile, her grandmother's cheekbones, and she's wearing the dress I had made for my daughter 30 years ago." James Morrison Webb pushed through the crowd, his face red with excitement. "I knew it," he said, staring at my dress. "I've been trying to figure it out all evening. This is from Valentino's 1995 private collection. There were only 3 pieces made, and this one disappeared after—" He stopped, understanding what had happened. after Elena Ashford left New York. Patricia Whitmore's carefully put-together act was falling apart. "Now wait just a minute," she said, her voice getting high and shrill. "Celeste has been part of our family for 22 years. We've invested—" "You've invested?" Harry's voice could have cut through steel. "You've housed my granddaughter in servants' quarters while your own children enjoyed luxury? You've told her she should be grateful for scraps while keeping her from knowing about her real inheritance." "We didn't know who she really was," Patricia said weakly. "You didn't want to know," Harry corrected her. "Any decent investigation into a foster child's background would have revealed Elena Ashford as the birth mother. But you preferred having a live-in charity case to make yourselves look good." I found my voice for the first time since this whole thing started. "The investigators you hired," I said to Harry. "They must have looked into the foster care system." "For 30 years," Harry explained, his voice heavy with regret. "But the records were sealed when you were adopted. The Whitmore family requested complete privacy. I respected what I thought were the adoptive family's wishes, even though it broke my heart every single day." Charlotte stepped forward, her face showing she was trying to figure out an angle. "Well, this is all very touching, but surely the adoption is legally binding. Celeste is a Whitmore now. She has responsibilities." "Her only responsibility," Harry said firmly, "is to claim her rightful place as an Ashford. The estate, the trust funds, the properties, everything Elena would have inherited now belongs to her daughter." "How much money?" Victoria asked bluntly, all pretense of good manners completely gone. Harry smiled grimly. "The Ashford estate is currently worth approximately $3.5 billion. Celeste is the only heir." The number hit my adoptive family like they'd been physically slapped. $3.5 billion. More money than their entire social circle combined had ever seen. "But the trailer," Sophia whispered. "We made her stay in the groundskeeper's trailer." "On property that my family owns," Harry pointed out. "In fact, we hold major stakes in this club and most of the exclusive venues in the Hamptons. The estate she'll inherit, the apartment in New York, the properties in London and California, all of it." I looked around at all the faces staring at me, my adoptive family's shock and horror, the crowd's fascination, James's genuine happiness for my good luck. Then I looked at Harry, my grandfather, who had spent 30 years grieving for a daughter he'd lost and searching for a granddaughter he'd never known existed. "I need some fresh air," I said quietly. Harry nodded like he understood. "The garden?" We walked through the big glass doors onto the stone terrace, leaving behind the shocked whispers and frantic conversations. The Hamptons' evening was perfect, stars starting to come out over the Atlantic Ocean, a warm breeze carrying the smell of roses from the garden. "Elena was so beautiful," Harry said softly, sitting down on a marble bench. "Stubborn, passionate, full of ideas about changing the world. She wanted to fix every social injustice, help every person who needed it." "Tell me about her," I said, sitting next to him. "She met Roberto at Columbia. He was studying to be a doctor, planned to work in poor communities where people couldn't afford health care. I was furious when she brought him home. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because I was a bigoted fool who couldn't see past my own stupid prejudices." Harry's voice broke. "She left that same night, took only what she could carry in one suitcase and disappeared. I spent weeks trying to find her, to apologize, to bring her home. When I finally tracked them down, Elena was 9 months pregnant, but she was so angry, so hurt by what I'd said. Before I could make things right." "She died giving birth to me," I finished. "Alone in a public hospital while I was too proud and stupid to swallow my pride and find her before it was too late." Tears ran down Harry's weathered cheeks. "Roberto tried to raise you for 3 years, but he was so young and grieving Elena's loss. Before he placed you in foster care, He made sure you had a box with Elena's dress and letters explaining everything, but told the social workers it was just some of your mother's old clothes. When he got overwhelmed and couldn't care for you anymore, you went into the system. By the time I found the hospital records, you'd already been placed with the Whitmores. Through the glass doors, I could see my adoptive family huddled together in intense conversation with several other party guests. Patricia was waving her hands around wildly while Charlotte, Victoria, and Sophia looked more and more desperate. "They'll fight this," I said. "Let them try," Harry replied firmly. "I have the best lawyers in New York, and more importantly, I have DNA evidence and that dress. Eleanor left it for you, Celeste. Roberto made sure you had it so you'd know where you came from." "What happens now?" Harry turned to look at me. Really look at me, for the first time as his granddaughter rather than a stranger. "Now you take your rightful place. The Ashford Foundation needs leadership. The businesses need someone to watch over them. And this old man needs family. I don't know anything about running $1 billion empire." "Eleanor didn't either when she was your age," Harry smiled. "But she had good principles, intelligence, and a good heart, just like her daughter." We sat quietly for a moment, watching the waves crash against the distant shore. Finally, Harry stood up and offered me his arm. "Shall we go back inside? I believe there are some people who owe you a very long apology." The ballroom fell completely silent as we walked back in. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned toward us. My adoptive family stood in a tight group near the bar, their faces showing a mixture of shock, anger, and desperate calculation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harry announced, his voice carrying across the entire room, "I'd like to formally introduce my granddaughter, Celeste Rodriguez Ashford, who will be taking her place as the primary heir to the Ashford estate." Applause broke out, real from some people, politely forced from others. I caught sight of several society photographers who'd probably come to capture the usual social scene, and instead found themselves documenting the scandal of the season. Patricia Whitmore approached with desperate determination. "Celeste, darling, surely you understand that family is about more than just blood. We've raised you, loved you for 22 years. Loved me?" I found my voice, and with it, 30 years of held-back pain. "You housed me in servant quarters while your real daughters lived in luxury. You told me I should be grateful for scraps while keeping me from knowing about my true heritage." "We gave you opportunities," Charlotte protested. "Education, social connections." "You gave me the bare minimum required to keep up your charitable image," I corrected, while making sure I knew my place at every family gathering, every social event, every single day of my life for 22 years. Victoria stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Celeste, please, we're family. This doesn't have to change anything." "This changes everything," I said quietly. "For 30 years you've made me feel like an outsider in my own life. Now you want to claim family loyalty?" Harry placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "I think," he said formally, "that Ms. Rodriguez Ashford will need time to process this revelation and decide how she wishes to proceed with her relationships." The message was crystal clear. The Whitmore's access to me, and by extension to the Ashford fortune, was no longer guaranteed. "But the trailer," Sophia whispered, seemingly stuck on this one detail. "We made her stay in the groundskeeper's trailer." "On property my family owns," Harry reminded them grimly. "Every insult, every slight, every moment you made her feel less than, it was all directed at the owner of the very ground you're standing on." James Morrison Webb approached with his usual warmth. "Celeste, I just wanted to say how happy I am for you. Your grandmother's museum foundation will finally have the leadership it deserves." "Museum foundation?" I asked. "Your great-grandmother Elizabeth founded it back in the 1940s, Harry explained. "It's one of the largest private art foundations in America. Elena was supposed to take it over before." He trailed off. Another piece of my heritage revealed, another responsibility I'd never known existed. The woman who'd been told she was lucky to have a family was actually the inheritor of institutions that shaped American culture. There's so much to learn, I said quietly. We have time, Harry assured me, all the time in the world. As the evening wound down, my adoptive family made increasingly desperate attempts to repair bridges they'd spent years burning. Patricia offered to help me adjust to my new circumstances. Charlotte suggested we could be partners in managing the social aspects of my inheritance. Victoria proposed that I might need family advisors for important decisions. Each offer was politely but firmly declined. I think, I said finally, addressing them as a group, that I need space to understand my new reality. Harry, grandfather, has offered to help me learn about my true heritage. I think that's where my focus needs to be. The defeat in their eyes was complete. The girl they'd treated as a charity case now controlled more wealth than they could imagine, and they'd burned every bridge that might have kept their connection to it. As guests began to leave, I found myself standing once again in the portrait gallery, but this time beside my grandfather. He'd pulled out a small photograph from his wallet, a picture of a young woman in a Columbia graduation gown standing with a handsome young man. Elena and Roberto at graduation, he explained. This was taken just days before she brought him home to meet me. She looked so happy, so full of hope. I studied my mother's face, so young, so full of love and possibility. She died giving me life, never knowing that her father would spend the next 30 years searching for the daughter he'd driven away, and the granddaughter he'd never met. She would be so proud, Harry said softly. Not of the money or the inheritance, but of the woman you've become despite everything you've had to endure. I want to honor her memory, I said. And Roberto's. And yours. This family, this heritage. I want to be worthy of it. You already are, Harry replied. Elena's daughter, standing in her mother's dress, ready to claim her rightful place in the world. Nothing could make me prouder. The next morning I stood on the terrace of what I now knew was part of my estate, watching my adoptive family pack their belongings into the cars that would take them back to their suddenly much smaller lives in the city. The expensive suites they couldn't afford without my grandfather's charity, the trust funds that looked like pocket change compared to my inheritance, the social standing that depended on associations they'd just cut off. Patricia made one final attempt, approaching me with her practiced smile of motherly concern. Celeste, darling, surely you won't let this change everything between us? We are still family, after all. Family? I repeated thoughtfully, touching the emerald silk of my mother's dress. You're right, Patricia. Family is everything. That's why I'm finally claiming mine. Harry came out of the house carrying legal documents that would make my inheritance official and begin the process of undoing 30 years of separation. The lawyers had worked all night, and by noon the transfer would be complete. Ready? He asked. I looked out over the grounds that were now mine, the club where I'd been treated as an outsider, the ocean beyond where my mother had once walked as a child. Then I looked at the family that had spent decades making me feel unworthy of love, let alone luxury. Yes, I said simply. I'm ready. As their cars disappeared down the long driveway, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't showing them my wealth. It was finally understanding my worth. Not the worth measured in billions of dollars, but the worth that came from being Elena Ashford's daughter, Harrison Ashford's granddaughter, and the rightful heir to a legacy of more than money. The girl who'd been told she was lucky to have a home was finally home. And for the first time in 30 years, I belonged exactly where I was meant to be. Standing in my mother's dress, on my family's land, ready to build the life that had always been my birthright. The life they'd tried to convince me I didn't deserve was finally truly mine.